For more than 2 decades, we've been educating our listeners about financial topics that are most important to you. Do you have enough money to retire? How will you keep from running out of money? What's your plan for managing market risk? What about taxes, inflation, and healthcare? Each week, we talk with an advisor at Lucia Capital Group about these issues and more. This is Managing Your Financial Future.
Yeah, we are managing your financial future. Welcome back to the podcast. Johnny Dean, your podcast host here. Happy to be with everybody. Extra happy because we got extra people here in the studio. I'll tell you about that here in just a couple of moments. I want to remind people here right at the top of the podcast, because I usually do this at the end, but I want to remind people that if you want to subscribe to this podcast, if you like what you hear, you should subscribe to this podcast. You want to go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I need to tell people that now so that, if they turn it off later on, they don't know how they can get in touch with us. So Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It is Managing Your Financial Future, and this is what we do here on this program. We give you strategies. I want to welcome first Professor Rick Plum, who is a certified financial planner professional. That's what we call you. It's one of the few times, Professor Plum, that we can actually call you a professional anything. I don't know why.
Hey, be nice.
I'm being nice, but we love to do these little digs at each other, sometimes before the show, sometimes on the show. But I do respect you, and you actually are a true professional in this sense. You are the professor, and you've got all the answers, which this is something that I've built you up when I said you've got all the answers. I haven't run across a time yet where you didn't have the answer, but hey,
financial planning is my life.
That's right.
There's
exactly.
a reason why we call him Rickopedia.
Oh, Rickopedia. Wow. Hey, did you hear that voice, folks? For people who are listening, we're also doing this on video today, but for the people who are listening, you heard a different voice in there. Now, I want to just say, Professor Plum, you remember it was last week we were talking a little bit about 401ks and Roth 401ks and all that kind of stuff. Mega Roths. And it involved your 401k in many ways. But, one of the things that people talk about is the 401k, and they don't necessarily understand what their options are in the 401k or how that works. And so I thought we would back up a little bit. And that voice that you heard a little bit ago was Ara Freedman. Now, Ara Freedman, who is a VP and wealth manager with Lucia Capital Group. So, it's kind of all in the family here. First of all, Ara, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us here for a little while.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's been a while, and we're happy to have you back on with us. Now, the reason we're having you on this time, well, you're a good guy, and you're a smart guy, and all that kind of stuff. But you had mentioned, I think, to me and Rick Plum, or somehow word got around that you had known somebody who was asking some questions about 401k. Just give me a very quick background on what you found out.
So basically what has been going on is people have been reaching out to me, and they just don't necessarily know what they have in their 401k or how to properly invest it. They switch jobs, they go somewhere else. For instance, like one of my friends, she just switched jobs. She's a nurse practitioner, and she was at one hospital group or medical group, and now she went to another medical group. She doesn't know, hey, what should I do with my old 401k? Do I leave it there? Do I roll it over into my new 401k? And then all of a sudden they have a new 401k and they don't understand what's in it, because every company uses a different service. You could have John Hancock, Fidelity, stuff like that, and the options inside there are different. It's just really just trying to guide people right in the right direction, because a lot of times it's just overwhelming because that's not their wheelhouse.
Oh, that's true. And this is one of the things that sometimes I think we, Professor Plum, you and I as hosts of this podcast, lose sight of occasionally. The more basic elements of some of these things. When we talk about things like 401ks, when we talk about things like Roth IRAs, we can sometimes throw these terms around as if everybody has the knowledge that you have, and the background that you have on this. And I think it's important to talk about some of the things that people are actually questioning.
Well, we throw around jargon from time to time where we think it's just everybody knowledge, everybody knows what a 401k is. And the reality is, and what Ara is speaking to, is that they have one, they know they have access to it, but then don't know if they're actually using it to the full extent. They're using it efficiently. They're using it to and even how to use it to benefit themselves the best is the way to do it.
Yeah.
It's just, it's there. But what is it? What does it really mean? What does it do?
Yeah, so let's address some of these things that you brought up, Ara, with your friend. What are some of the things that you would do to create a kind of, potentially an optimal 401k allocation strategy? If what advice would you have given your friend who had mentioned that to you?
First and foremost, it's always risk tolerance and time horizon, right? And diversification, right? Those are the only benefits or things that we can use inside of a 401k to combat volatility, right? It's different, such as my friend, she's in her early 40s. She's got about 20 years if she's going to before she retires. So that's very different than some of my other clients who have 401ks and they're going to retire in the next 5 years, right? Their allocations are going to look very different, right? The risk tolerance is going to be different. And it really comes down to the individual, what they're comfortable with.
Would you say that if somebody does not have a high risk tolerance, but they're in their 20s, what would you tell somebody? I mean, to me, I think back when I was in my 20s and I first heard about this whole 401k stuff. And
well, to make the hair on Rick's neck stand up, I would tell him to go 100% bonds, right? And forget about it.
No. I'd say grow some thicker skin and learn to accept a little volatility, because those younger people that are 20, they put in their $100. So what if the market drops by 50% the next night? They lost $50 on paper, but then the next paycheck goes in and buys twice as much as it did before. And so the volatility helps out tremendously for that 20-year-old, because they can't touch it for 40 years anyway.
Plus, they got the dollar cost averaging, Rick, right?
The dollar cost averaging is everything for that person. Now, as you were talking about your clients that are 3, 4, 5 years from retirement, they actually have money in the 401k, and they don't want to see a 50% decline, because if they get a 50% decline, that's a big number. That's not $50. That's a big number. So volatility is not their friend. We have to, as you mentioned perfectly, address the volatility and how to either protect or use it to your advantage.
Yeah, time horizon and risk tolerance. Now, two very important things. When it comes to any kind of planning, investing, or whatever it happens to be. But I wonder in this case, if you're talking to a friend who says, I'm just really afraid of stocks, would you put time horizon as a slightly more important, or maybe more, more important than their risk tolerance? I hesitate to use that word because I don't want to diminish the importance of risk tolerance. But at the same time, somebody with 40 years till they retire, or 30 years,
or even 20 years, especially, when we make buckets plans, we're doing 15 years out, right? Mm-hmm. And that allows us enough time to, if the market goes down, we still have time. We have a time horizon, right? It's very different when someone is going to need income from their portfolio in the next 5 years versus, 10 to 15 to 20 years. So I would say time horizon is more important, right? Then it's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? Versus, what are you comfortable with? But I would say it's more important.
It's definitely a starting point. What is your time horizon? And because if your time horizon, like we were talking about, is 40 years, you get used to it, bucko, because you're going to want that volatility. On the other side, if your time horizon is only 3 or 4 years, now we got to do something different. Time horizon is the starting point for determining what they should be doing, and then their risk tolerance gets tailored into that. But the starting point to me is the time horizon.
Yeah, and that's a better way of putting it than importance. Probably the starting point being the time horizon. Because I really wish somebody had said that to me. I really started investing. Professor, my story. You know my story.
I was going to say, you took volatility to heart, baby.
Well, I'm telling you, yes. My very first jump into the 401k, and I was like...
That's like, what, February 2000?
I was 36 years old, and I said, I really haven't pumped this up. I was working in the radio industry at the time. I hadn't joined up with you guys yet, and so I didn't know a whole lot about it. But I said, let's do this. Let's tech up this thing. On March 1st of 2000 or something. And it did
just before the tech bubble burst.
Yes, and so
even though I know the stock or the mutual fund you had, it lost a tremendous amount of value. It didn't really affect your overall long term because you didn't have that much money in it.
Plus, if he was dollar cost averaging, he would have gotten that stock on sale.
Right, but there are times, and this is where dollar cost averaging does not guarantee a positive result because a mutual fund can stink and stay stinky for a really long time where you don't get the valuation, the value averaging benefit. And this one went from $1 gazillion a share to $4 a share and stayed there for a long time.
Yeah, I think a good 15 years.
It was the John Dean effect.
But again, this has to do with time horizon, and I still had 30 years, so it really wasn't that big a deal to me. Although I didn't like to do it. So time horizon is important. Risk tolerance is another thing that's important, and then there was another one that you threw in there. Was it the asset classes or what was your
diversification?
Diversification. Yeah,
and that comes in with asset classes.
Okay, so talk a little bit about when somebody wants to put together their 401k allocation. They say, well, okay, I've got a time horizon. Let's say it's 20 years. I know everybody's different, but let's talk about somebody with a decent time horizon. They've got 20 years. They say, well, I understand 20 years. I'm not averse to stocks or anything like that. So let's go with that. Where would you tell somebody to start now as far as their asset classes within their 401k? And then we're just doing this generically, obviously.
Yeah, obviously. One thing that I want to be privy to is also the fees inside of the 401k, right? There's some asset classes, such as some ETFs or indexes inside of the 401k that cost less than some of the mutual funds inside of the 401k. Or you want to look at fees, right? But really, when it comes down to is you want to be broadly diversified with some U.S. large cap, such as the S&P 500, some mid cap, some small cap, a little bit of international, right? You don't really necessarily need bonds or anything of that sort because you're not going to touch it for the next 10 to 15 years. That's just going to add drag to the portfolio. And then with that long of a time horizon, that's why I mentioned fees, right? Fees can add drag to portfolio performance as well. So you want to be kind of aware of that when you're looking and picking funds.
Now, for somebody who doesn't, for somebody who doesn't know what fees, what are you talking about? I mean, talk about that for a second.
Correct. Yeah, there's internal fees that funds will charge you inside of the fund that you pick, right? And on top of that, there could be different fees that the 401k charges you as well. But really, we're talking about, the inside of that fund, there's a fee that's built into it. And you want to take a look at it, right? Just don't go like, oh, that one looks good. Sure, it looks good. But take a look at what the fee structure is and the past performance.
Okay. Yeah, which of course makes sense. Now that's somebody with, say, a 20-year time horizon, something like that. There are people who are older than that. Now, presumably, well, I mean, there are.
There are people on this podcast that are older than that.
I'm looking at two of them.
You are. Well, you are. And so I can't leave these people out. Now, I'm going to make a presumption I probably shouldn't make, which is that somebody who is in their 50s and who has been working for a company for a while that has a 401k, I would presume that they've been saving in a 401k of some kind, assuming that they had one available. But for somebody who maybe hasn't and didn't know anything about it, or they just got into the workforce, let's say, after not having worked, maybe they had a family, and now they're 50 years old or 52, 53, and they say, look, I'm going to work for the next 10 years. I mean, that's some time, but it's not a ton of time. What different advice might you give somebody who's, say, in their 50s and they're just starting a 401k?
The truth of the matter is I would probably tell them for the first 5 years, invest like you're 20 years out and then dial back the risk. And the way you would dial back the risk is by adding some stable value fund exposure or money market exposure or bond exposure, right? Being more balanced, kind of like a 50 to 70% stock to bond allocation, after the 5 years. Because really the truth of the matter is if you're going back into the workforce and you're basically making up for lost time.
Yeah, no, you are for sure. But of course, you don't want to tell somebody, gee, I mean, you've got so much catching up to do. We're going to have to swing for the fences. You did say invest for the first 5 years or so as if you were 20, which could mean something like what? 100% aggressive growth? Or are you talking more like...
Yes, 100% aggressive growth and then dial it back.
Dial it back at the 5-year mark or something like that.
At 5-year mark, right. I would say that.
Yeah.
Just dial it back and then go to a more, balanced approach, somewhere between, 50 to 70% stock to bonds. And then that way, right, you have 50% stock and then you have 50% bonds, and it kind of just balances each other out, and you're not taking as much risk because you have that bond exposure.
Yeah.
Now, I'll say one thing. When you talk about dialing it back, in my opinion, you dial back the existing investment money that you've started to build up.
Correct.
You do not dial back the ongoing contribution. I don't care if you're retiring next year. Your ongoing contribution should still be full aggressive, baby. Keep it going, because you're going to continue. That the money you're saving today, I'm retiring next year, is not the money I'm going to spend the first year of retirement. It's the money I'm going to spend when I'm 85, 90. So that money has time. The existing money, I want to have my existing money safened up a little bit so that if I want to retire and take out $30,000, $40,000, that it's there and it didn't go down with the market. So there is a difference between the ongoing contributions and the current asset allocation that you have. And this leads me to something I'm going to throw out to you, Ara. But my 401k does it all for me. They use target date funds, and it's a no-brainer. I just put it in the target date to the year that or closest to when I want to retire, and I don't have to worry about any of this because it is just a set it and forget it no-brainer. What do you think about that?
Sure, if you're lazy, right? But the truth of the matter is you got to look what's inside of the target date fund, right? There could be a good one, there could be a bad one, but the truth of the matter is just because it says a target date doesn't mean it's actually going to meet your needs. That's why you need someone like myself as a financial advisor who understands the ins and outs of investing, who can actually guide you and tell you, you know what, this target fund, sure, yeah, it might work, or it's complete malarkey. Do this, and this, and I can help you save a whole bunch of fees inside of the fee structure inside of the 401k. I just don't know, because every person or every target date is different, right? There's some good, there's some bad, but on the whole, I feel we can do a better job than that.
And you are correct. The first statement you made was, it's lazy. It's for lazy. It's the lazy man's way of doing it. The lazy person, excuse me. It doesn't make sense. I mean, it can be used, but it shouldn't be used without some thought behind it. And the whole idea of bringing the target date funds were that you don't have to think about it. But the reality is you have to think about it, because the target date funds never go all the way to pure safety. So when you retire, you're taking the money out of volatility anyway. And while they're getting closer to the target date, they're going away from pure aggressiveness to more safety, and that takes away your dollar cost averaging concept. So one of the things we talked about at the very top of the podcast was how to be efficient, how to create that 401k and use it efficiently. Target date funds are not efficient in that. And so I threw you the softball. I'm sorry. I had to throw it out there.
Well, it's an important thing, Professor Plum and Ara, because we know how prevalent target date funds are and have become over the years within 401ks. And they're touted exactly as you said. It's a set it and forget it kind of a thing. Hey, when do you want to retire? Oh, you want to retire in 2055. Okay, well, hey, we've got a 2055 fund for you. And all you got to do is put all your money into this and just watch it. Just forget about it. Come back in 30 years.
But a 2055 fund has 30, am I doing my math right? 30 years to go. Mm-hmm. And it will have some component, maybe only 5%, of bonds in it. And to Ara's earlier comment, that's a drag on the portfolio when you got 30 years. Why purposely put a drag on your portfolio.
And that drag, by the way, will probably get worse as time goes on. In another 5 years, we're going to start to see more. So you got to watch out for things like that. I saw Professor Plum nodding with agreement when you were talking about that, Ara. So you are correct with that. Now, there are people, too, when we talk about this whole set it and forget it idea, I think for many people, the whole idea of a 401k is set it and forget it. I don't want to have to think about it. I'm just going to put my money, every paycheck, whatever it is, into this 401k, and I'm not going to have to think about this. But there are maybe some things that somebody should do, Ara, when it comes to, let's talk about maybe rebalancing. Now, we talk about rebalancing on other things, but for some reason, I think that the 401k, people who set it and forget it don't think about doing that within the 401k. What are your thoughts on rebalancing?
So usually what you'd want to do is kind of just, you want to check it, right? You want to check the performance, right? Also, you want to check the fee structure, and you want to check in with yourself as an individual and say, hey, how close am I to retirement? You want to check in with that time horizon coming back to that, because the truth of the matter is if you set it and forget it, and then you're 3 years away from retirement, 5 years away from retirement, and you're still investing like you were, a 25-year-old or 30-year-old, all of a sudden there's a pullback in the market and you didn't rebalance. Guess what? You might have to work an extra year or two, right? Look at what happened in 2008. Look at what happened in, the tech bubble. It's stuff like that. So you have to check in with yourself on an annual basis. You have to be your own best advocate and realize what you have in there, because the truth of the matter is no one's going to do that work for you. Sure, there's resources out there with the invention of the internet. Then you can go in there and you can find whatever information you want, and you can actually be your own, advocate, or find someone like myself or Rick.
Yeah. Rick, I think you would probably agree with that.
Well, I just agree with the fact that everything that's on the internet is perfect advice. And if you follow what you find on the internet to the letter, obviously I'm being sarcastic. That is not a true statement. You need to check in, and you want to look at your mix. I think you need to check into it more frequently as you get within that 10 to 12 year time horizon from retirement. And that's when you're going to start not just changing your investments, but your overall strategy. When you're between 20 and 30 in your 401k, you still have 30 plus years. Even with 40, you still have 20 plus years. The only thing you're looking there is your diversification within the stock portfolio. You've got your small cap, large cap, mid cap, that kind of stuff. But as you get within 10 years or so of retirement, now you're going to start adding different types of investments. You're going to start adding balanced portfolios. You're going to start adding some of those stable value funds and other things, because you're completely changing your existing investment strategy. It's no longer go for the growth, baby. It's now, how do I make sure that a 2008 doesn't affect my ability to retire when I want to retire, either from a purely financial standpoint or just from an emotional standpoint. I mean, there were a lot of people that could still afford to retire in 2009, 2010, but emotionally they just didn't feel anywhere near as secure. But then there were also people that couldn't afford to do it anymore, and they had to do that extra 2 or 3, 4 years of work. And that assumes you can continue working. Some places you can't continue to work. Your body is done. You just can't do it anymore. So you have to, as you get closer to that retirement age, start looking at it more frequently, and looking at that time horizon. We started off talking about time horizon. Look at what is the purpose for the money. What am I trying to accomplish? But between 20 and 21, you can leave it, let it go.
And I just want to bring something up as well. How many people have you met that didn't know they had a match, or they were not meeting their match, right? I actually had someone, and I said, oh, so what's your match? And they're like, oh, 6%. And I'm like, oh, how much are you saving? The full 6%, right? And they just looked at me with deers in the headlights. Why would I want to save the full 6%? And it's like, and you have to remind them, like, you're leaving free money on the table if you're not meeting that match.
Well, that match is part of your payroll, part of your pay package. They're willing to pay you whatever it is, $50 an hour. Plus, they're going to give you more if you do a little bit for yourself. So that's part of your pay package. They want to do it. First off, the match is rarely the value. The match is always great, but if all you're doing is saving to the match, you really need to push yourself further. You need to be saving more than most companies will match. But the first thing to do is make sure that you're getting that match. Step one, get the match. That's why a lot of funds now have, or a lot of 401ks have auto escalators. Put that in place so that it automatically increases your percentage every year that you contribute. Get to that matching contribution. Get that free money. Get what the company is willing to pay you for the work that you're doing. Otherwise, you're giving yourself a pay cut, and you didn't even know it.
What have you seen, Ara, that has prevented people from putting more in just to get the match? To me, as I think back all those many years ago, to me it was like, well, gee, that's going to actually cost me money because now I'm going to get a lower amount in my paycheck, and I'm not going to see that match for, however many years it's going to be. What have you seen as the reason people haven't done it?
So the truth of the matter is it depends on where my clients live. If they live in a very high cost of the living area, for example, San Diego, a lot of that money is going to housing and mortgages, right? So they're willing to put off a little bit of their 401k or, investing in the 401k so they can get into a house. The other thing is, kids and stuff. Kids are expensive and family. And then what they end up doing is they end up ratcheting it up over as their career progresses and they start making more and they start adding more and more into the 401k. When retirement becomes like, it kind of hits them like, I'm going to have to retire. So I better start, get the ball rolling and start investing more inside of my 401k.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that too. And I've been doing my 401k for as long as they have allowed me. And it's funny when you start looking at, they can divide up what the employer has put in versus what you've put in. And I thought, man, I mean, that's not an insignificant amount. And it does add up, as the employer is also dollar cost averaging into that 401k. Ara Freedman, I really appreciate you being here on this program. Thanks for taking the time to do that. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you, they can what?
They can check my YouTube channel, right? And they can also email me at afreedman@luciacap.com. And my YouTube channel is just Ara Freedman. So if you guys need anything, reach out. I'm here to help. And, really, I kind of, I thank you guys. I've been working with you guys for quite some time. And it's always funny being on the media side versus just being behind the desk with the clients.
It is. Now, your YouTube isn't Ara Freedman MBA. It's just Ara Freedman.
I mean, I should probably add the MBA on there, right?
You got it. You might as well add it. Come on.
Now, wait, that's MBA as in Master of Business Administration, not NBA.
No, not NBA.
Los Angeles Lakers.
I am not tall enough. I am vertically challenged, right? I got the brains, but not the height.
Yeah.
No, I got my MBA in financial planning from Kalu up in LA. So
good for you.
This is my bread and butter.
Well, we're happy to have you on. I appreciate it. Thanks again, Ara.
Not a problem. Talk to you guys soon.
All right. And my thanks to Professor Rick Plum, Certified Financial Planner Professional, for being in on this podcast as well. Don't forget, you want to get in touch with Professor Rick Plum or any of the Lucia Capital Group advisors, including Ara. You can do it at luciacap.com, LUCIACAP.com. That's one way to do it. You can also get in touch with them via phone, 800-644-1150, 800-644-1150. And again, just as a reminder, as we did here at the top of the podcast, you can subscribe to it. Go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, either one, and get every single episode downloaded to your device. Do that, Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Subscribe and download. Appreciate everybody for being here, and I thank you for listening. For Professor Rick Plum, Certified Financial Planner Professional, I'm your podcast host, Johnny Dean. We will talk to you again next week. This has been Managing Your Financial Future.
The information provided should not be considered specific tax, legal, or investment advice and is not specific to any individual's personal circumstances. These materials are provided for general information and educational purposes based upon publicly available information from sources believed to be reliable. The information in these materials may change at any time and without notice. There is no guarantee that any investment strategy will meet its stated objective. All investments involve risk, including potential loss of principal. An asset allocation strategy does not ensure a profit or protect against loss. You should always seek counsel of the appropriate advisor prior to making any investment decision. All investments are subject to risk, including the loss of principal. This material is gathered from sources believed to be reliable. However, its accuracy cannot be guaranteed. The information contained herein does not constitute an offer to sell or a solicitation of an offer to buy securities. No client or prospective client should assume that this information or any component thereof serves as the receipt of or a substitute for personalized advice from Lucia Capital Group or from any other investment professional. Diversification strategies do not ensure a profit and cannot protect against losses in a declining market. A dollar cost averaging strategy does not guarantee a profit or protection from loss. You must consider your willingness to continue purchasing during periods of high or low price levels. Past performance does not guarantee future results. Examples cited are hypothetical, are for illustrative purposes only, are not guaranteed, and subject to potential federal and state law amendments. There's no guarantee that you will achieve the results discussed or illustrated.
Distributions of principal from a Roth 401k are tax-free. However, any earnings will be taxed at ordinary income rates, and a 10% penalty tax will apply if withdrawn prior to age 59 and a half or within 5 years of the date the Roth 401k was established, whichever is longer. Your investment options are limited with a Roth 401k to those offered by the plan administrator. Charges and fees may be incurred. 401k benefits may be subject to change at your employer, the governing pension, or benefit organization's discretion. It is important to keep in mind that investments in fixed income products are subject to liquidity, interest rate, financial inflation risks, and special tax liabilities. Interest may be subject to the alternative minimum tax. S&P 500 index is an unmanaged index and includes a representative sample of large-cap U.S. companies and leading industries. An investment may not be made directly in an index. Before investing, carefully consider a mutual fund, stable value funds, money market funds, and/or target date funds, investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses. To obtain a prospectus or summary prospectus which contains this and other information, call your financial advisor. Read the prospectus carefully before investing. Rick Plum and Ara Freedman are registered representative with and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and member FINRA SIPC. The companies mentioned in this presentation are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Lucia Capital Group.